My friend chewed up and swallowed a chunk of char-broiled armadillo. I choked down a bowl of squirrel stew. My dear husband swallowed whole a slimy pod of boiled okra. So what's the grossest thing you've ever eaten in the name of love? Sharing food in every culture and in every time has always been a sign of the profound connection between and among people. When we set aside our differences to feast at the same table, we make a covenant of peace. We remember that we are brothers and sisters in one great human family, that we are all children of the one God. That's why we Christians compromise and sacrifice our personal preferences. It's all done for the sake of love. It was my pastor friend Penny who once ate that armadillo on a medical mission trip to the backwoods of Venezuela. The indigenous people they were serving there gave them their very best game, and in return, her United Methodist folks from Alabama gave them the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that squirrel stew, you Men's Fellowship folks will be happy to know, was served to me by the Men's Fellowship of a tiny North Carolina church that I was then serving as a music director. They were great country folk, and they loved to make fun of me for my big city ways. They just couldn't wait to tell me that next week that there had actually been pork instead of squirrel in that stew. They just wanted to know if I loved them enough to choke it down. Food has always really spoken loudly the language of love. My dear husband, as many of you know, was born into a great Southwestern Hispanic and Italian ranch family that grew its own hot chili peppers and garlic. So he, bless his heart, suffered serious culture shock when we were dating, and he sat down to eat with my kinfolk for the first time in North Carolina. Southern cuisine is a bit like British cuisine. Boiled meat, potatoes, entirely spice-free vegetables. He didn't even recognize the green beans. We cook them all day, simmer them slowly on a back burner of the stove with a big chunk of pork fat back for flavor. I'll never forget the desperate look that he shot me across the table as that slimy pod of okra went down his throat. I knew then he was mine forever. It had to be true love. In the same way, we in the church expand our covenant of love like a family adding leaves to a great table each time we receive new members, as we do today. Each of us has followed a different path, unique to ourselves, that has brought us here to this crossroads today. From different branches of Christianity, different ethnic backgrounds, different regions of the country, but they all converge here at this table of God's grace. As many of you know, our national denomination, the United Church of Christ, brought together two different smaller denominations in 1957, one largely Germanic and the other Anglo. And this was only a dozen years after the Great World War II, where the nations of our ancestors had been killing one another. And when our Southern Conference of the UCC was formed back in the 1960s at the height of the Civil Rights Movement, black and white churches were coming together in ways that were unheard of then in my home church, in my home state. I went to a church camp, a lot like our Silver Lake, that was integrated even before our public schools. My parents hosted with the an exchange Bible study with the African American Congregational church across town. And when they met for the first time in our home, they made a point of informing all of our neighbors in advance because they were a little worried about what might happen if people of color were seen entering through our front door for the first time. I was a child. I laughed at my parents' fear. It all seemed so ridiculous to me. What in the world could be threatening about a bunch of boring grown-ups carrying Bibles and potluck dishes? But they said they did receive some telephoned threats. They were worried because a simple church potluck in the right time and place can be a prophetic shout. It can be prophetic preaching in the Christian language of love. Purists and traditionalists have always resisted the breaking of cultural norms, especially food regulations and etiquette, dress codes, and class divisions. You remember how Jesus got the Pharisees a little worked up by dining with people they considered inappropriate. Tax collectors, foreigners, and eunuchs, the blind, the lame, even women. And our dear friend Paul, he started that church there in Corinth, which was a very busy seaport town, a crossroads of the Mediterranean, the Roman Empire. He had plenty of challenges in knitting together in love, in covenant, that motley crew of new Christians. Most Corinthians, of course, had been Gentiles and pagan idol worshipers before their conversion. And it's important to know that the common people rarely ate meat at all, this controversy about meat. But on special occasions, like a funeral feast or an anniversary feast to honor a dead ancestor, the animal would be sacrificed, most likely at the family shrine before an idol. So the question for those Corinthian Christians, which Paul was asked to settle in his letter, no doubt, was whether a pagan barbecue was a harmless local custom or a real spiritual danger for new believers. Which was best, his people wondered, to consent to eat meat sacrificed to idols for the sake of hospitality, to do the guest, the host, the honor, and to perhaps convert them by the good spirit of that gesture? Or was it better to abstain, to set an example, to keep new converts perhaps from backsliding to old superstitions? Well, what I most appreciate about Paul's answer, as a pastor, local pastor often asked to settle some matter of policy,